production keeps prices down far more effectively.
As long as suffering of sentient beings remains, I will remain in order to serve.
I imagined God like my grandfather.
In Conversations today, my guest is considered by many to have been the individual most responsible for the shift in the paradigms in which we view and preserve our cultural heritage. She is indeed the First Lady of India's culture. She's had a long, rich and varied career, too numerous to recount here. She's the teacher, philosopher, and institution builder. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan. Kapilaji, you got involved with the Ministry of Education, and soon after independence you've created these many institutions that have been in the service of different aspects of our culture. What was the mindset that you were working to reverse or preserve when India was freed from the colonizers?
Rajiv, I was a small factotum just working in a field which to me was precious. I've done very little. However, I think that it is perhaps necessary, especially for your generation, to know where it began or so on. That whether it was Mahatma Gandhi or Jawaharlal Nehru and many, many others, and not in pre-independent India, and those of us who went abroad about that time, this is a journey homewards. This journey could not have been taken if we had not been exposed there on their ground. And I think that because you spoke about whatever little career I have, all my training was in English literature, Western art, etc.
Yet you practice a daily sadhana of dance.
Yes, and this is where that, because it was this was the twin heritage that I had. On the one hand, the great teachers of Achan Maharaj, Amobi Singh, Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai, and the lot. And on the other hand, as rigorous a training in Old English and Middle English and so on. But it was in the United States, with absolutely no sense of rejection, but with great sense of ignorance. I said, what are you doing here? You don't know anything about your own country. Or that what you are inherited as an emotional or as a practice, but not at an analytical level. And this journey brought one back, not as a revivalist, to know things at the roots, endless walking trips in South India and so on. And it was then that about the first half of the first decade of independence, that in the Ministry of Education, there was a shift. There was a shift because of the visionaries that Maulana Azad, they realized that something had to be also done with this thing called culture, which had not been given any, not only importance, but legitimization in a previous era. So now, that's how it began.
But in the theory and processes of culture and civilization, why was that important? To reach back into our civilizational past. What relevance does that have today?
I'm not very sure whether, Rajiv, with all the respect in the world that I have and my greatest reverence to these visionaries and so on, I'm not very sure whether, on hindsight, that it was as clear as that. It was that we wanted to give Indians a sense of self-esteem. There were also a feeling that disciplines which had been neglected should be brought. But let me tell you that there was no attempt like that of going into civilizational studies or something. It was a much simpler agenda that certain areas had been neglected, or that now with changed circumstances these were not receiving patronage. Therefore, government should come into it.
What is the value? There is so much money that's invested, and you have built up such institutions that are doing very important work. And at a superficial level, we have this sort of harking back to India's glorious past, without the linkages, in some ways, to our present dilemmas, predicaments, and crises. What importance, what role does this process
Rajiv, yes, I think that we should look at this seriously, that are the institutions harking back to the glorious past like that? And I don't know which institutions you have in mind, because the institutional framework has been departments of archaeology, if you want to, and National Museum, or the chain of museums, or archival thing, and these are much more down to earth business of conserving.
I should correct myself. Actually, I think that the rhetoric of popular vocabulary is harking back to India's glorious past, on every platform. I wasn't sort of pointing to the institutions in particular.
Yes, I think we should make that quite clear. I'm not sure whether that rhetoric of popular articulation, if that is tautology, is either relevant or, may I say, sincere. Because if we, first of all, there is no such thing as a glorious past in the absolute. Civilizations pass through all kinds of ups and downs. At this very moment, if you look at India from one point of view, you will find it a rather gloomy picture. At the same time, if you look at it at other levels, which you and I have shared, then we know that if there is any country which has the seeds, or which still has in its earth the possibilities of looking at life in its entirety and with a sense of holism, it exists here. And this is like a kaleidoscope, that these are pieces of this glass, and it makes different configurations. And India, with its plurality of not only religions and so on, pluralities of the nature of discourse that goes on here, I don't think we can make ever a statement of either a glorious past and
or a glorious future.
Or a glorious future, or a glorious present. Either way, because these currents have always gone on. And one makes a statement about this glorious past only if one does not relate to it, let me tell you. If you relate to it, then you have a very different kind of a relationship. And the only thing that is important in this, and which is very important, is that here is a civilization in its dynamics of continuity. A continuity which is never, never still. It has a stillness, it has a collectedness, but it is not stagnant, and it could not have been continuous if it had not changed, and if it had not responded to whatever you call the present. And the paradigms themselves are flexible. This is my point. And therefore I cannot say that in point A, at situation B, in time C, this was a glorious past. Am I making myself clear at all?
You've had a long association with the performing arts, both as you know, I mentioned the sadhana that you do yourself, and of encouraging and cultivating a lot of young talent. Do you, in sometimes, are you despairing that under the onslaught of international media and television and American cultural imperialism, and one would use a dramatic sort of word, that this is now seriously threatened and swamped, and the essential well springs of integrity and sadhana that it emanated from are being lost?
Reluctantly, I have to agree with you. Most reluctantly. I think that these arts, any art of any kind, is another methodology. It is a vehicle. It is a vehicle of ascension. And this is, as whether it is a scientist's work in a laboratory with concentration, or it is a writer's work, or a painter's, but the musician and dancer who has to go through this training, and this again is not a static business of age old again, 2nd century BC. No, these are eclectic forms born, but the spirit has been the continuity. The attitude of mind has been the continuity. And once that which is a vehicle of self-discipline primarily, and then to be shared as whether sadhana or satsang is shared, is packaged. It's the same in spirituality, we know that. And it's the same in these arts. And once the emphasis in motivation in any field of activity moves from both self-reflection and to exhibition, not that the latter is to be ruled out, the nature of that art has to change. It does. And this is, and the moment of its success is the moment of its inner depth.
If I'm not being sort of too personal, what is your own personal sadhana involved?
Nothing. I don't do a thing. I only...
It shows.
Not at all. I don't do a thing. Not at all. Nothing. I don't do a thing, but I will share with you something that a teacher of mine said to me. This was in the context of dance, naturally, and dance has been my walking stick for life. I sat at his feet for many, many years, and great teacher. Guru Amobi from Manipur. And at the end of this, and he was 94, and I saw him dance to the Yugal in Vrindavan. And after all these years, and this is a long story of, this is a very moving story of training and learning at deeper levels. He said, I have not been able to teach you any dance, but I've given you eyes to see. And all that I can say is that from these great teachers that I've had. Perhaps this gift of seeing and recognizing where it is the only thing I can.
Well, this is a gift that you have transmitted to thousands of people in your many roles. The institutions that you've been associated with and you have built and survive and sustain and flourish. Your most recent engagement has been with the IGNCA, and you're the academic director, and you were really the person who conceptualized a role for an institution such as that. What was the role that you saw for the IGNCA?
Rajiv, I'm only a tool.
Tool for what?
Someone decided that there should be such an institution, and whether by accident or chance or volition, I was identified to be the person.
But then you gave it form and direction and a philosophy and vision.
So I'm not the decision maker on the birth of the institution. However, once given this task, I did see things. Again, we're back to this seeing. And then looking. What did I see? I saw that there was need to, we'll begin negatively, there was need to redefine the term art at all. And that art was not a matter, nor was culture for that matter, a matter of spectacle. Nor was it a matter of patronizing all these people who are artists. So that the two things that were taken out of the, and this was being competently done by other schemes, institutions, that the arts was not a matter of a final product to be presented, but the, whatever you call this creativity, it moved from the whole gamut of work, function, the earth itself, to whatever you call the physical, the metaphysical. Also I realized that there was such a gap between what we consider to be the domains of science, technology, and what we consider the arts. Also that this was not a question of a arty business in a vague business, that the arts were dealing with, or creativity was dealing with, major issues or vital issues which had concerned whether they were thinkers or scientists. This was one. And that with this in view, what could one do? What we tried to do was to build these bridges. At the physical level, have a massive program of microfilming of this heritage which is lying all over the world, and which was, due to the historical circumstances, spread in repositories abroad and in India, to try and retrieve a memory, let's say, a broken memory or a discontinued, with its discontinuities too. But more important was to make the bridge between the textual and the oral traditions. Then there was the question of how do you get concerned with seminal issues communicated to the present. And fourth, there was this great tool of technology, the whole of the computer technology. So our programs briefly were to go into, to have a great library, which is great, a textual program which goes into the texts of architecture, sculpture, not published but earlier in Sanskrit, in Persian, in other languages, and in translation. A field program which may or may not have an output as a book, but the work that we have done in Manipur, in Meghalaya, and which results in films, etc. And finally, over these years, to concentrate on single themes. Akash, you've seen that. Which
The exhibitions.
The exhibitions, the multimedia exhibitions, seminar in which scientists, microbiologists, astrophysicists, Sanskritists, anthropologists, the idea is to see the universality of these concerns, both cross-culturally as also across boundaries of disciplines. And then it was to communicate. How do you communicate? And then a fine computer lab, a multimedia lab, and you've also seen what we tried to do with the Gita Govind. Gita Govind was an attempt at seeing the relationship of this invariable and invariable in the Indian, that nothing is static. The Rig Veda says, truth is one, but there are many ways. The Buddha says this in several other ways.
But yet, inevitably, institutions depend on governments, it depends on, a whole range of other institutions for funding and inevitably direction. To what degree do you feel that institutions are ultimately ideologically fettered in what they send out into the community? And can institutions be ideologically neutered in some way?
Rajiv, I'd like to respond to that with my administrative hat. It is not healthy for the institutions to be dependent for funding totally on the establishment. Nor can you say that the government should not be in this field. Now, how do you find a healthy relationship, an adult relationship between two partners? The solutions that have been found, and some of them are abroad, and now one can go to even institutions like the British Museum or the National Council of the Endowment of the Humanities and so on, is that the government gives seed money as endowment, as it is called in American, or what we call corpus funds or something, which is only to set people off. These are like starter sets, as they say, in another sphere. And from that point onwards, there has to be a certain amount of financial self-reliance.
And the community must respond.
And the community must respond. Unless you have that kind of financial flexibility, how do you do? And also, unless you take initiative to raise your own funds, at least partially, you can never be autonomous.
In a question of, in a context of a scarcity of resources, as we have in India, what would you finally say, why is it important as a priority for public money, or whether it comes from the community or the establishment, to be invested in these aspects of culture? I mean, in a sense, I'm asking you, to sort of your life's work.
No, Rajiv, I think, no, you're right, absolutely right. I don't see why the establishment should invest in this, even if it is meant that I have been part and parcel of the very notion of the establishment investing in this field. In terms of pure proportion, that I would disagree with you from what little purely factual knowledge I have. You know that culture came under the category of what was known as invisible expenditure in government.
You mean because it was so small?
It was so small. You know that it was not part of the planned budgets of the government until the third five-year plan. You know that it is still, perhaps, I don't know, the last 8 or 10 years, I'm out of touch, but that in proportion it is probably the least funded department of the government of India. It's a very high-profile thing because you're dealing with the fragile area of creativity. But in terms of funding, I think you should, perhaps one should look at this.
We've been talking about glorious past, and most people would argue, and you in your modesty wouldn't accept this, to say that you've had an extremely productive, rich, and varied past. What agenda do you set for yourself now?
Oh, Rajiv, you asked this
What is
question
it?
of everyone who interview here. I have no agenda. I'm just...
Flowing.
Ah.
Thank you very much indeed.